Welcome in. You have found We Like the Blazers. I'm Connor Bergen, joined as always by Brandon Goldner-Mullen.
Hello.
And it is a special episode today because we are joined by Ben Golliver, the national NBA writer for the Washington Post since 2018, but many of you are probably familiar with him from his time at Blazers Edge, where he worked there for 7 seasons. Ben, welcome into the program.
Thanks for having me, guys. Glad to be here.
Yeah, last week we had Senator Ron Wyden on, and
wow.
I normally would think that is a tough act to follow, but I think this is a good 2-week stretch for the show, Brandon. This is, heavy hitters back to back.
Well, I know Golliver's a big Merkley guy, so we just got to tamp down on that and, respect Senator Wyden,
Wow, I mean, I did not know that. I'm not sure I would have agreed to do this if you had told me that I had to follow Ron Wyden, an Oregon legend. I'm sure he knows ball. And that's like the whole thing on social media now. Are you a ball knower? It seems almost guaranteed that Ron Wyden knows ball.
He does, because I was worried, maybe he was like faking it politically a little bit, his ball knowledge. And then he started dropping like deep cuts about Shaedon Sharpe and was like, did you see that play against Julius Randle from last game? And I was like, okay, he's clearly watching some games. But as I mentioned, Ben, you worked at Blazers Edge for 7 seasons. I think you started in about 2007. And you were the last regular credentialed press member from Blazers Edge to be attending games so frequently. And that has not been a regular thing until this season when I was lucky enough to get the pass. And so before that
Speaking of tough acts to follow, am I right?
Yeah. No.
Yeah, slightly smaller shoes.
No, pretty big. The commenters don't forget you, Ben. There's a lot of references back to your writing. And because of that, when I realized that I was going to be in the building and doing this as more of a full-time job this season, I went back to some of your old Media Row reports, which was your personal nightly recap with your spin on it on each home game. And the thing that struck me about them, I liked them a lot, but they were so personal and creative. There was a lot of creative writing in it. And that's what I've always enjoyed reading. And then I looked up your background, and it said that you studied creative writing at Johns Hopkins, so it made sense. So my first question was, how did you go about kind of inserting that creativity into sports writing and finding that blend of, more personality and first person with more traditional X's and O's sports writing?
Well, I definitely don't want to give myself too much credit. In fact, the opposite. It's amazing how long it took me to realize that I loved basketball and I loved writing, and that I should maybe consider writing about basketball. It was into my mid-20s before I managed to do 2 + 2 = 4 on a career front. So I do not want to come across oh yeah, it all made sense, it all worked out. Writing at Blazers Edge was amazing. It was the best possible way to learn how to cover a sport. A lot of times writers will go to J school and they will start, high school prep sports, at a local paper and try to work their way up from there. For me, it just wasn't my passion, anything besides the NBA. And so I needed to kind of jump in the deep end. And there's so many great writers around the team back when I was starting, obviously starting with Jason Quick, who's still going strong, but Kerry Eggers, Dwight James, guys who I grew up reading. So it was so fun for me to just kind of watch how they worked, kind of get the timing and the motion of how writing works. I didn't have a hard deadline like some of the print writers, but obviously, they had to be up, in the middle of the night or by the next morning so people could read it. So you just start to kind of get that routine, that flow of an 82 game season. And of course, at that point, we're not traveling. So I'm kind of doing the home games, and I'm feeling like I can kind of pour out all my takes and all my interest into the Blazers, into those long pieces. Now, thankfully, that was back at a time when people had attention spans. I think it's much harder to write at that length. And I'm not sure people would have wanted the answer to every single question from the coaches. I would kind of transcribe every single night. Maybe people do, maybe people don't. The diehards at Blazers Edge would probably be one of the few places that would still want that, because everybody's just looking for sound bites and clips. So a lot has changed since I was doing it. But one of the big challenges I had was, obviously I love the NBA. Obviously I grew up with the Blazers. going to high school in Beaverton, I did not want to come across writing, like I was on the team or like I was a fan. Like I wanted to have some level of a distance, right? And I think in the back of my mind, I was like, well, maybe this could be a career at some point. This was just kind of like a side hustle when I first started at Blazers Edge. But I had the idea, hey, I want to kind of turn this into something maybe eventually if I'm lucky. And so I had to have a little bit of distance from kind of the homerism aspect to it, but also I wanted to have my own touch. So I'm sure I'm writing in the first person a lot. I'm sure I'm doing all sorts of goofy stuff and riffs and, kind of capturing the fan moments in the random game notes section, which was obviously my favorite part. And I think a lot of people's favorite parts as well. But, I haven't gone back and read too many of those. So hopefully the writing holds up. I have no idea. It might make me cringe now. But I think it was just sort of like you do enough of them and you eventually find your lane, and I think that's sort of how I landed on it.
I mean, I feel like if you're not cringing at your old writing, then it means you're not progressing. So it's probably a good thing, right?
Totally.
I had a question. You talk about trying to keep some distance from the homerism aspect of it. And also, like, you're there, you're on the ground, you have access to the players, access to the team. And this is something Connor and I have talked about, that you need to use some level of discretion with what you share in your writing in order to maintain trust and confidentiality in relationships. But you also have a professional obligation to tell stories and to share stuff that people think is cool. How did you strike that balance in your work?
Well, it's funny. Again, it was sort of the wild, wild west back then. I didn't feel like there was always people sort of like looking over my shoulder. Now, of course, we would get some pushback every once in a while from the PR staff, especially about tweets, maybe if they're negative or kind of like criticizing players, you might kind of hear from some PR people. Honestly, I think the first player who ever lodged any sort of a complaint, and it wasn't even direct, but it was actually Damian Lillard. And he said something to the effect of, yeah, he said anything that goes on in this locker room somehow ends up online. And I took that as a compliment because I was like, that means I'm writing everything. And he didn't mean it that way. He meant it like, hey, wait a minute. Like, can we have a little filter here? But, I was trying to take people there and give them a side to these players that they obviously care about. So many of the major stories, they would fit at Blazers Edge, but maybe they wouldn't fit anywhere else, right? Like we were joking earlier about the Raymond Felton, back and forth with the cupcakes and all that. That's probably not going to be a thing if I'm writing for the Washington Post, right? Or even when, I don't know if you guys remember where he challenged his critics to come fight him at his apartment building. Yeah. Even something like that. It's probably not going to come out the exact same way if you're not writing for like an independent paper. So I think, the person you have to give credit to is Dave, because I'm sure maybe he took the complaint phone calls and I didn't. But he always stood by our writing. It was usually just subtle advice of like, hey, maybe don't do this, maybe don't do this. And again, it was one of those things where you kind of like shoot first and ask questions later. Maybe we're like the J.R. Smith of the blogosphere at that point, where it was really like, hey, let's try to get it all out there. If we need to pull back, we could pull back if it really becomes a deal. But, just on a human level, most people know when they cross the line. Most people know when they push it too far. And I don't think we had too many episodes quite like that. But it was a constant dilemma of like, I want to give people everything. And, these players are not used to that. They're used to very packaged newspaper stories. They're used to the television clips where, they're kind of on camera and they're prepared. And so I'm sure it was, some tension and some people who didn't love kind of the in-your-face style that I took. But honestly, I didn't hear a ton of negative feedback. And I do think people in the organization respected the fact that there was this interest, right? So you're throwing all this stuff out there and people aren't reading, people aren't commenting, people aren't clicking, people aren't talking about it. The headlines aren't circulating on social media. No one's going to care, right? Like you're irrelevant. And I think there was a nice, strong run there where Blazers Edge was right in the front of the conversation about the team when I was there. And that was something I really took a lot of pride in. It maybe, everybody watches like a Brandon Wright game winner, right? So that story writes itself. But maybe we can find something about Luke Babbitt and Taco Bell that nobody else has thought of. And that becomes a meme that you guys still remember 15, 20 years later, right? And so that was sort of the goal.
I do think the point you made about Blazers Edge and the reader's attention spans being so much longer it's so great from a writing standpoint because, I think it's the only place where I feel comfortable like writing out like a 1,500 word piece about like a random game and people have the appetite to actually read it. And then when you talked about the discretion of the locker room, I have taken maybe a slightly different approach of asking questions first, and then figuring out what the line is. And I was shocked because I only got locker room access after Christmas, and I was asked. There was like little funny tidbits about like music and like this and that, like stuff I didn't think that was that consequential. And I was like, oh, you guys don't care if I put this in there or that, and they were kind of like, well, they just didn't seem like they loved the idea of that, which maybe just speaks to how the NBA is a bit more buttoned up these days. But I did also want to ask, like, you talked about you were learning so much during that time, and I read a quote. We did our prep, Ben. I read a quote from an interview you did with Dave.
One of us did.
Where you said it was like a 5-year PhD learning experience, basically, for like NBA crash course. And I've, in year one, just with how there's so many games and you are learning on the fly, this is a two-part question. One, when did you kind of feel like you had established yourself or settled into it and felt more comfortable at Blazers Edge? Maybe you didn't through 7 seasons. And then was it weird? Did it feel kind of backwards going through that training ground with like such a big spotlight, and with the NBA team you grew up watching? Because that's one thing I've experienced is like I feel like I'm taking my lumps and learning, and it's while I'm running about the Blazers, which is just a strange. I figured that would happen, like, I don't know, when I was like 45 or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think no one knows what they're doing their first year, and if they tell you they do, they're lying, right? So I think, humility is really important. I did not ask a lot of questions media-wise. When I approached it, I was very much about, like, let's watch, let's observe, let's think about things, let's try to find a different perspective. And if there's an opportunity for interviews here and there, then that's great. But, don't be the loudest guy in the scrum who's got to shout out every question, who's got to be kind of like show them who's boss. That really wasn't my approach. And some of that goes back to the creative writing thing. I'm trying to find tidbits that I want to read as a reader, as opposed to just, finding something juicy that, is going to sell papers. Because obviously at Blazers Edge, we're not selling newspapers. To me, it was just, I had to learn everything. I remember sitting at the Moda Center, then it was called the Rose Garden, just reading the media guides from like every single team, right? Like not cover to cover, but like going through, learning the player buyouts. Like it was, that level of an education. Now, obviously I was a basketball fan previously, but when you're doing it for real and you want to try to like be authoritative, you got to know your stuff. You got to know people's backgrounds. So obviously it was great to have some mentors, some guys who would help. I think a lot of times maybe I'm writing some stuff that other people wish they could have written because maybe they had editors who are trying to pull them back, or maybe they've got word counts, or maybe they've got structure limits that we just did not have because it was a competitive advantage at Blazers Edge to just have almost total freedom to write what you want to write. And then you got to listen to the reader feedback. I mean, I go back to that all the time. It's one of the reasons why I still love reading Dave's stuff and the community that he's cultivated, because they will kind of steer you in the right direction, right? And sometimes you'll know you're onto the right direction because everybody's mad. And then it's like, okay, all right, this is stuff that people don't want to hear. It's a hard truth. And so then I know I'm kind of like, striking the right chord. So you have to be perceptive. You have to be willing to kind of course correct as you go. And also, if you're not getting feedback and you thought it was good, you have to ask yourself, well, why not? Why didn't people care? And try to adjust that way. I would say by like the 3rd season or so, I was feeling pretty good. And at that point, I started working at CBS Sports, covering the NBA on a national basis. LeBron had gone to Miami for the decision. So there was this huge explosion in interest in the NBA at that point. And so at that time, I guess that's maybe when I kind of quote unquote felt like established, like, all right, like this could actually be something. And for the first couple of years, it was just kind of like, I don't know, it felt like Clark Kent. I get to put on like my Superman cape at night and go cover the Blazers, and then have to go into my day job at 8:00 in the morning and clock in,
I had one more question for you about your approach to your work today, and then I want to talk about our Blazers. You may not do it, but I'll do it. It's our team, damn it. I feel like I bought enough merch, enough tickets where I could say that. I'm like a one 10,000th shareholder, 100,000th. So now you're at the Washington Post and you're covering the entire league. You were just at All-Star. You obviously were one of the few people who got access to the NBA's bubble and wrote a book about it called Bubble Ball. You should pick it up right now. I'm curious, in what way is your approach to writing different now that you have been doing it for a long time, but that you're covering all 30 NBA teams? One week you're writing about Paolo Banchero, the next week you're writing about Wemby, and then the next week you're writing about Luka Doncic. Has your approach to writing changed at all, or cultivating relationships changed at all now that you're not now, but that you're not focusing on just one team?
Well, let's just be real. I'm just writing about Luka every day now for the last month, and probably for the next 5 years of my life. I mean, I don't know if I am covering the 29 other teams. It's nice of you to say that. It doesn't always feel that way. Look, I think when you're writing the national you can kind of make it how you want to make it. Now, some people are going to go towards news breaking. Some people are going to go more towards profile writing, feature writing. Some people are going to go more towards like analysis, columns, that type of thing. I think for me, I want to do a little bit of everything and not care so much about the news breaking. That really hasn't been the major focus of my passion or my interest, trying to tweet something out earlier than others. I want to, if I can, and it's getting harder and harder in terms of access, but like try to tell people stories through profiles. And so, that's actually led me the last couple of years to, interview high school players like Cooper Flagg. I did a big story on him last year, or Caitlin Clark a couple of years ago, the women's basketball star. So those are the kinds of stories that get me excited. In Miami, I went down to, in December, I went down to Miami to meet up with Jimmy Butler, and, his passion is coffee. He's in the middle of this he's about to get into this middle of this holdout. And so it was just some hilarious color and just like what a whirlwind in a zoo that he's involved in down there. And so hopefully the story I wrote from that gave people sort of a window into what his life is like, just a very strange portion of his career. Right. So that's kind of my main interest, but I love to do columns, and I love to do sort of like scene pieces. For example, Luka will play his first game against the Mavericks tonight. So what does that look like? What does that feel like? A lot of that stuff is just straight out of the Blazers Edge playbook, maybe with a little smoother edges, right? But, the same general idea of trying to take you to that arena because we're so privileged to get to go to all these places where most people don't have the money or the access. Sometimes they're living halfway across the world. So I want to sort of take them along with me. Very similar idea in the bubble, and with the book, it's this idea of like, I won the golden ticket, just like to get this opportunity to be there for 93 days, sort of like hop on my back and I'll take you on this ride and we'll go through it together. That's sort of what I try to go with. And then, the other aspect to it is stuff happens and people need it to be explained to them quickly, right? Victor Wembanyama goes out for the season. Well, what does that mean? Why does that matter? What's it going to look like for him next year? Those kinds of questions that immediately come up. The longer you write about something, the more you become an expert on that subject matter. You can be the person to help answer those questions. And so I try to do that as well, especially for our audience at the Post, which is composed of a lot of sports fans, but it's also just a lot of general interest, general news readers who need somebody to kind of steer them the right way.
Nice. All right. Well, let's talk about a team that maybe you're not asked to write about quite as much anymore, the Portland Trail Blazers. So right now they're sitting at 25-33. They've had an interesting season. You cover the entire league, and I want to get your perspective on this. What is your take on where the Portland Trail Blazers are as a franchise right now?
It's in a frustrating spot. There's not really any way around it. I mean, I could mince words and be polite, but they're lost. They're adrift. They're out to sea. I see kind of two different rosters with this group. I see the old guys who, by and large, and old is in quotation marks because they're just sort of prime age players. They're not prospects.
I'm 40, so just hold on a second there.
Right. Well, I am too. So everybody's young compared to me, except for LeBron. But yeah, you got DeAndre Ayton, you got Anthony Simons, you got Jeremy Grant. Those guys are just in the way, right? I mean, I look at this group. My favorite player on the team is Kamara. I jokingly call him a franchise player. Now, obviously, he's probably going to have to get his scoring average up, a little bit before he can really be that. But of anybody on the team for this season, he's the guy who I would be drafting first in terms of what his impact is defensively, how hard he plays, and how much he cares. I mean, that seems like it's been a real issue just for this entire group over these last couple of years is the inconsistency and effort level, and the togetherness has just not really been there. And, throughout Blazers history, that's typically something you could count on, right? And so that's why it feels a little bit adrift to me. Now you have a new front office, you've kind of got a relatively new business side group there, and then you've got this ownership where I just have no clue what's going on. This is gigantic ownership vacuum. And so you throw all those things together and it puts the players in a tough spot. Like they almost have to be like self-motivated, self-driven. Obviously they're going to have coaches to kind of help them. And I just don't think that some of those older players have lived up to that and have taken on that leadership mantle in a way that they needed to. So to me, the more minutes that you can allocate down the stretch of this season for Scoot Henderson, for Kamara, for Abia, for Shaedon Sharpe, even though it can be frustrating to watch him and his effort level is real up and down, the better. It's like, I don't know, you're not really chasing anything. You're in this 13th seed. You're in no man's land. You're in a very, very tough conference that's so unforgiving. I think it's just kind of time to pull the plug on the older guys and go towards the younger guys, and then just pray that you finally get some real lottery luck, because that's what's been missing more than anything these last couple of years is the one super high pick they got was Scoot, and where everybody's still kind of waiting to see, is he going to show that he deserved to be the number 3 pick?
So, sorry, Brandon. So do you think then that, just what were your thoughts on the deadline then? So
ridiculous.
What
are they doing? I mean, so
you would have traded the vets for like pennies on the dollar is the popular term.
Yeah.
Just
no,
to
wait a minute. Now, let me hold on. Because that's the question I was going to ask. But to set this up, I mean, Ben, you saw the rest of the NBA landscape and what happened at the trade deadline and what players are going for. I guess that, I understand that valuation changes from year to year. I mean, should Joe Cronin have looked at the market and just traded vets for a relatively low return, historically speaking, or should he have?
Well, that's the problem. I think that you're learning from this deadline that no one's really coveting the Blazers players, right? That's kind of the takeaway, because they so obviously should have made the move for the future that the fact that they didn't says that nobody gave them good offers, and that's a tough spot to be in. I mean, at the very least, you feel like you can, sell off a player like Robert Williams, right? Like, what's going on? What use is he to the Blazers? I don't get that. Again, these are not going to be huge home run deals, but you're stuck in the worst part, because it used to call the treadmill of mediocrity, where you're just like, oh, we're losing in the first round, but you're not even doing that. You're not bad enough to get the number 1 pick, right? But you're not good enough to even compete for a play-in spot, which, it's a pretty low bar, especially when you've got Phoenix playing like they are and Wemby out for the season. So you're just in absolute no man's land, and to just continue to go through that with no direction, with no real clear plan. If there's a plan, let me know. I would love to hear it, or whatever they're claiming the plan is. But it's been like this ever since Dame got traded. The Dame trade happened at a great time for the Blazers. I thought they did fine on the return, but the subsequent lack of moves to kind of like fill that out, sticking with Chauncey Billups over multiple years where the team just kind of feels directionless, and some moments they look good, some moments they don't. It just does not feel like the type of program you need to build to compete in this league. The models for the Portland Trailblazers should be the Memphis Grizzlies and the Oklahoma City Thunder. You're at a massive market disadvantage. You need to have a coach that has a very clear style of play, who is a grade A lunatic in terms of a competitor, who paid his dues in the G League, so he understands what young players are going for. He knows how to craft a culture like a Taylor Jenkins or a Mark Daigneault. And then you just got to hope that you hit on some draft picks and you can kind of take off from there. I don't really see a method for Portland to get themselves into playoff positioning by trading these overvalued veterans, or I guess the market would now say they're undervalued, or I would just call them overrated. Like you're not going to trade your way to the 6th seed or the 7th seed if you're the Blazers. It's going to have to happen through the draft. And are they taking the steps to prepare themselves in the best manner to build that way? I don't think they are. And by the way, is the fan base responding? I mean, you guys could speak to this better than I have. I'm hearing a lot of people are tuned out, a lot of empty seats at these games. The fire isn't necessarily there from night to night. And that's one thing, if you go back through and read those media row reports, you will hear about engaged fans, every single one of those stories practically, because that was just, and I don't even want to call it a golden era because they didn't even win a playoff series. Like maybe they won one once Damian showed up, right? But Roy was his career was almost over before it started, and yet the fans were invested because they believed in the vision, they believed in the decision makers. I don't sense any of that right now, and that's a tough spot to be in. And it's something that ownership should correct, and ownership doesn't do interviews. So what's their game plan? We have no idea. It's been that way for years. Doesn't matter how long people scream about it. It stays that way. To me, that's a broken culture.
Oh man.
I got a question unless you got one, Connor.
Oh, I think the difference it sounds like is that those years kind of right before the Roy years and when it was starting to come together was like an era of great hope, even though it hadn't translated into wins yet. And right now, the hope and like the vision, like you say, it's a lot harder to see. Because there has been some games this year where the attendance just feels really just light, and only up until that winning streak was the first time I saw like kind of like the Rip City kind of like swagger energy start to come back a little bit.
Well, here's the thing though, it will come back immediately. Okay, once they kind of get back on the right track, once they draft, like let's say they get Cooper Flagg, I promise you people will be waiting at the airport, thousands of them, to welcome Cooper Flagg to Portland. That's the awesome thing about Portland. That is the market advantage that Portland has, is incredibly passionate fans, incredibly smart fans. The reasons that they're tuning out right now and they're not going to the games is because they're smart enough to realize that this formula is broken, right? And so I understand it's coming across a little bleak. This is not unsalvageable. Nothing is broken forever, right? There are, and if the people who are in charge are reading the room properly and saying, well, our fans are not as engaged as they should be. Our players are not developing in the same manner as that they should be, right? Our veteran players are not leading as they should be. It's time for some change. Maybe that means a new coach. Maybe that means some major offseason trades once some of these guys don't have as much future money left on their contracts, like a DeAndre Ayton or a Jeremy Grant. Once you get, one fewer year, they become easier to trade. If you can kind of get yourself to pivot hard this summer, you can get it back on track quickly. Look at the Houston Rockets. They were a disgrace 2 years ago, right? And they're so good, their fans haven't even caught up. I still see too many empty seats at Rockets games, right? So you can turn this thing around quick. This era is designed for parity. This era is designed to build through the draft. I like the Blazers, draft guy, Michael Schmidt, smart guy, long track record of success. And they're just waiting to try to get a hit, and we haven't seen the big hit in the draft yet. Doesn't mean it's not coming.
All right, Ben, listen, as a Blazers fan, I need someone to blame, okay? And part of what's so frustrating about this season, and you already said it, is that some of these players that they need to be playing minutes are not playing. Here's Shaedon Sharpe's last 5 games, minutes played, 20, 30, 21, 21, 18. I need to ask you, whose fault is this? Is this a Chauncey Billups problem? Is this a Joe Cronin problem for not telling Chauncey Billups what to do? Or is this a Jody Allen problem for not telling Joe Cronin, for not telling Chauncey Billups what to do? Who am I blaming here?
Look, I start with the player, actually. I reject the premise.
Hey,
I start with the player. Here's why. It's hard to develop a dog if you don't have it early, right? And it was the big knock on Sharpe in high school. Does this kid have the dog? He's got every physical tool you would want, jumps out of the gym, decides not to play in college, which was a red flag for some scouts. People were saying even back then, like, hey, why aren't you playing? Like, basketball players, if we're going to draft a basketball player, the number one thing they need to do is play basketball, right? So that was weird for people. And I think he's had some bum luck, obviously, during his NBA career, right? But the one thing you can control is how hard you play, the impact you have every single night. Your coach will play you if you are making an impact defensively. It's just how the NBA works, right? Kamara is the perfect example. He had no reason to get minutes when he first got to Portland. He was an afterthought, a throw-in. I remember going down to the Blazers training camp at Santa Barbara. I didn't even see him on the roster because I was talking to Stu. I was trying to talk to DeAndre Ayton, who definitely did not want to do an interview. I was talking to Joe Cronin, about the Damian Lillard fallout. It was a great time. They're playing in this great sweatbox gym in Santa Barbara, and they look like they were ready to turn to the page and have a new chapter. And it just kind of feels like they haven't made any progress really since that moment. And Sharp's indicative of that. I think you don't want to give him minutes, but I do think, what you could do is you could put it on Cronin and Chauncey to a certain degree, because it's time for like a group conversation. Maybe they've already had it. I don't know, but it's like, sit down, let's talk. What do you want out of your career? Do you want to get a big next contract? Like, who do you want to be? There's a famous story with Masai Ujiri and Kyle Lowry. He gave him exactly that kind of tough love when he first got to Toronto. And he's like, look, dude, you could be a starting point guard in the NBA, but if you don't take this more seriously, we're not even going to keep you around. So who do you want to be? And it feels like Sharp, even though he's still so young, he's kind of approaching that crossroads, right? Like he's kind of getting towards that moment where it's like, now's the time. What are you waiting for? One player I've always thought of in the back of my mind with Sharp is Jalen Green with the Houston Rockets. Now, I've never been a big Jalen Green fan. He's very divisive. Some people love him. Some people hate him. There's some inefficiency to his shot selection. There's some decision-making issues. Until this season, there was a lot of questions about his defensive commitment, but you can't deny his athletic ability, right? And so I think if you're Shaedon Sharp or you're the Blazers, you say, hey, look at Jalen Green. He kind of didn't fully commit for the first couple of years of his career, and he got this weird contract where it was like halfway guaranteed. Like every year, it's kind of re-guaranteed almost. And so, if you really want to cash out, if you want to get life-changing money, generational money, you need to kind of get ahead of that curve and make a bigger impact. And it's going to work out for Jalen Green. He's had a better season this year, and I think he's going to wind up, having a long career. It'll probably work out for Shaedon Sharp too, because a lot of the stuff he has you can't teach. But if you want to justify being where he got drafted, it's got to start with him and his commitment.
Well, shoot. I'd really just rather blame the coach and then switch him out next year and think everything's going to be okay. But
why haven't they changed coaches? You guys tell me that.
Well, the maybe money. Maybe money.
I didn't say that.
maybe money factors into it.
It feels a little bit. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, just the narrative that we hear and the players repeat is that they like him and that they play for him. And like with where the franchise is, I think Dave has even kind of wrote this a lot. It's like, well, what would changing the coach like realistically do? But then the flip side of that is, and I see this in the comments a lot too from fans, is like, well, like just because it might not have like a tangible winning impact, that's not why we want to change coaches. We want it for like a culture reason, which is kind of what you were getting at too.
Yeah. Well, he was just hired to do a different job. He's hired to steward Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum on a playoff journey, right? Well, those guys are long gone, as you well know. And I look at some of these young coaches who are getting opportunities. The communication with today's players, it's really led to a gold rush of young coaches. Joe Mazzulla, Charles Lee, the list goes on. Mark Dagnall's incredibly young. We were joking about our age earlier, Brandon, but there's a lot of NBA coaches now who are younger than us, right? It used to be crazy when the Blazers said, hey, we want to have Caleb Canales as the interim coach, right? Now it's like everybody's looking for a guy who can kind of communicate those messages and speak the same language as the younger players. So to me, he doesn't seem like the right fit for this group. And I really hope, kind of for both parties' sake, they kind of split this summer. I think there's probably some coaching jobs that would be a better fit for Chauncey Billups, his history, his skills as a former player, and his winning. And I think there would be a lot of younger coaches who would probably be better fits with the Portland Trailblazers, somebody who could kind of rally the troops in a way that maybe hasn't happened.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I want to make sure that we respect your time. We had a couple of questions that we threw into the Blazers Slack that I want to lob
Bring them
you.
up.
First one's coming from longtime Blazers Edge senior leader, editor. I don't even know what he is. Time. He comes in with, does Ben Golliver still keep a copy of the infamous cupcake picture somewhere in his collection? And Ben, you need to explain. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but what is this picture? What's he talking about here?
So the Blazers had some sort of an event where it was Raymond Felton's birthday, and somebody very kindly made cupcakes for him. And he has a sweet tooth because he was raised in South Carolina. I want to say his dad had worked at like a chocolate factory or something like that. There was some origin story. Yeah, go look it up. Don't quote me on that. But I'm almost positive one of his parents worked at like a candy company.
His father was
sort.
Willy Wonka, basically.
Yeah, right? sort of what it sounded like.
Yeah.
Anyway, he had long admitted to having a sweet tooth, but of course, coming out of the lockout season, not everybody was ready. A lot of people didn't think there was going to be a season, and so he kind of got caught a little bit surprised and wasn't in shape, and he really struggled the first season. And so, unfortunately, that photo of Raymond Felton holding a cupcake, a very innocuous photo at a PR event, kind of gets twisted into this idea of like, okay, well, he doesn't really care about his conditioning. He's a big guy. Now, granted, he sort of became public enemy number one because he had a lot of comments about the Portland fans. He didn't really want to be there. He was looking for a different, situation. I think he wound up going to the Knicks, and I'm sure he was sort of much happier after his Blazers chapter. It just wasn't the right fit at the right time. I'm not sure he ever really was on the same page with Nate McMillan either. So he kind of became the scapegoat. And, that photo at one point, I think it was every single display image on the website. I think for his first game back to play the Blazers, we had 5 stories that were all about Raymond Felton, and every single picture was the cupcake photo. So, look, I mean,
oh man,
yeah,
I always have heard of people call him Raymond Cupcake Felton, and I knew it was like the weight issue. But I never knew there was literally a photo of him with a cupcake. I didn't know its origins actually had physical evidence of him with a cupcake.
No, and like it was a thing that really took on a life of its own. I mean, local radio, the cupcake thing was a big deal. People would yell out "cupcake" during games, like signs at the games. I mean, it really took off. So again, it was probably better that he found a different home. It was just worked out kind of better for both sides, like kind of like what I was saying earlier about Chauncey Billups.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. Next question coming from Paul Navarre. He was just curious what your thoughts were when the Denny Avdia trade went down. Portland moving some future assets for a relatively young-ish player on a good contract who at times has been the Blazers' best player this year. I don't think we can argue that. But yeah, what'd you make of that?
Remember how surprised everybody was in training camp or whenever that first came out I was it Chauncey who said Denny's been the best player, and people like lost their minds and maybe it was mistranslated or whatever. And it was like, well, that's great for Denny and maybe not great for the team. Right.
It was mistranslated. He didn't say Chauncey walked it back, but it's true though now.
It ended up true. Yeah.
That's the thing. The truth rose to the surface, didn't it? I mean, it was one of those things where the coach is sitting there like me watching Kamara being like, this is the only guy who's playing hard. So this is the guy who I like. I think that was kind of one of those moments probably for Chauncey. It was a nice trade in hindsight and a solid player. Now you understand why he is available because he's not some amazing shooter. He's not some amazing off the dribble offensive threat. He's probably a little bit miscast in his current role. Like, I don't know. Maybe they're asking him to do a little bit too much if he were like a winning team, but he's definitely a keeper and he's also a culture guy. And I think that's really important as they go forward here. I mean, the guys who I look at the highest priorities, I would say him, Kamara, Scoot, Shaedon, and Shaedon's kind of the question mark as I was talking about earlier. You feel like that's probably something to do with your core. And when you've got young guys who haven't really hit like Scoot and Shaedon yet, that's your best path to getting better is having those guys break through and, really make the most of their talent that got them drafted so high. You want to have players like Avdia around who are just good guys, and focused and committed. They play hard every single night. They set that kind of a tone. And honestly, I think for Portland, it's a good reminder. It's like, you're not the worst situation in the NBA, right? It's like, Avdia is probably much happier in Portland than he was in Washington. He's winning a lot more games. I would say Portland's future is brighter. Their collection of young talent is better than the Wizards. Their timeline to being relevant is probably shorter. And so this is a case where it worked out, even though it was a little bit of a surprising deal because he wasn't like a 21-year-old they're taking a flyer on.
We're actually recording this the day before the Blazers play the Wizards, so we'll see how this plays out.
So I just jinxed the whole thing. Now the Wizards are going to get I think that's going to be their third win against the Western Conference all season long. So congratulations.
Hey, but they might get flagged, so maybe
they won't get flagged. We can guarantee that. Karma dictates these things. The Washington Wizards will not be getting Cooper flagged. The Wizards go to form, they're going to get Ace Bailey, and he's going to shoot 41% on turnaround twos for the next 15 years. That's going to be how it goes. Now, we'll see if they've shaken out of that like Larry Hughes type shell that they used to be in all those years ago. But that's the karma gods will say Ace Bailey to the Wizards. Portland, Utah, San Antonio, I think that's where Cooper needs to go. One of those three spots.
Oh, from your lips to God's ears.
Yeah, that would be great. Definitely would make, I was just going to say, would make the reporting a lot, probably easier. Yeah. I read your piece about Brandon Roy, and you talked about, like, he just, in a way, like, made your career by coming to Portland. And Cooper Flagg, I would hope, would have a similar, like, astronomical effect. So,
well, look at the Mavericks right now. I mean, like half the Mavericks media is trying to decide, should we just move to LA? You know, I mean, what do we do? It's a real thing.
We don't have time to get into that. I still don't understand that trade. I still think there's some weird backroom cabal of billionaire handshakes. Like, there's no way for me to justify in my own mind why that happened. But Ben, we appreciate you. I'm going to do that thing that people do on podcasts. Like, where can people find your work? But where can people find your work? I've seen you on Blue Sky. I've seen you elsewhere. Where are you?
Yeah, Ben Golliver on Blue Sky, WashingtonPost.com/sports, Ben.Golliver on Instagram. The Greatest of All Talk, NBA podcast is my baby. We've already done 5 years independent. Andrew Sharp and I podcasting twice a week. It's been pretty awesome. He's had 2 kids. I've written a book since we started the show. It's been a pretty wild ride. So if people aren't listening there, I would really appreciate it.
Sweet.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ben.
That's it. Yeah, I will awkwardly get us out. Ben, appreciate you. And thank you.
My pleasure, guys. Always good to go down memory lane. And let's just hope some of that hope comes back. You know, it's about time. I think the Blazers fans have paid their dues. And anybody who's still going to games and sticking through it, nothing but the highest respect for those fans. I went through it with Michigan football. There were a couple of pretty lean years there. People are talking about firing Harbaugh, this, that, you know, and it paid off with the Rose Bowl victory, one of the greatest days of my life. So I know that feeling. And I just hope that, a parade awaits, I guess, to put it that way.
I know we're extending this, but like isn't this part of being a Blazers fan? Maybe I'm looking more at Connor when I say this. Is like, I don't know, like going through this is kind of part of not the fun of it, but it makes it more meaningful. Connor, you talked to Eric Peterson about this. Like, I'm extending this way too long, but yeah, we're used to it.
You gotta go through the hard times to enjoy the good. And right now, the good is going to be so sweet because right now it's pretty hard. So yeah. That's it.
Oh, why? Yeah. Sorry, guys. I'm stomping on you.
All right. Thanks, Ben.
Take care, guys.
And we're back. Connor, you and I are going to hang out for a second. Thank you again to Ben. We'll thank him again at the end. What did you make of all that? I feel like we had a little bit of chance to decompress off screen and just wanted to jump back in here. But what'd you make about what Senior Golliver said on this very podcast?
Yeah, this is like our kind of after hours casual talk, it feels like.
Yeah, you got like a snifter brandy and a cigar and
exactly
slippers.
Man, it was
light jazz.
For one, I can tell that he does this for a living. The takes were just very enlightening, like, and very good, well put. But just to hear a national perspective, on the Blazers, and one that is also, it's national, but obviously so tied to them.
Well informed.
Yeah. To hear the criticism of the direction was just obviously like the most eye-opening part of that talk for me. I'm
going to interject really quick to say, just for me, not speaking for anyone else, somewhat validating about my Blazers opinions. Continue.
Yeah, just because that has been a national perspective, and I've been trying to like work through my own kind of source discretion this year, and just to hear Ben say that stuff about the direction and needing to free up the young guys just hammers it home that I think it's a very valid take, and fans have been kind of rightfully so wanting more of a stamp of like what this team is and what it's building towards.
I think they're getting it from us when we talked about role clarity, Connor.
That's true. We've been kind of banging that drum too.
It really is all about us, isn't it?
Yeah. So just from somebody who wants the Blazers to do well, like that was a bit hard to hear. Like, and I even said like, oh, it was bleak. But I think he also the other thing he said was that it's a pretty quick fix this summer, and I'm hoping that's what we see of just these trades are made and that the team can kind of just firmly turn the page into this next iteration and seeing what they have with Scoot and Shaden and Donovan and Denny. Like, let's just and I love that he said that, you know, once that kind of happens and they get it going again, like the fans and the energy will pick right back up. So it was a hard dose of reality, but also I think he did good of showing that they're not completely lost and that there is signs of optimism, but just some more clarity and decisions have to be made.
More clarity and decisions definitely do have to be made. I also slightly disagreed with him about the Shaden Sharp and who to blame thing, although it did get me thinking. Shaden Sharp did come into the league with the reputation is like not having that dog in him. I guess my argument is, if you think he might have the dog in him, is the way to get the dog out of Shaden Sharp to play him 19 minutes a game while Jeremy Grant is going 1 for 12 and also not playing a lick of defense? How does that, like, I don't know. Like, that's the thing where it's what I watch, and I didn't get a chance to ask him this. Other players are doing the same things on the court that Shaden Sharp is being punished for. How that might feel to you as a player. Probably wouldn't really appreciate it. So, and I get it. Like, at some point, a player has to take responsibility and you have to do what you can do in the role that you're given. But anyway, yeah, it was great to have Ben on. I'm excited to have him on again at some point. I also wanted to quickly, actually, you wanted to, but I'll pretend like I wanted to talk about the Jazz game, Connor, a game in which the Blazers were up pretty big, pretty late. They almost blew it. Then they didn't. A game that they played their vets heavily down the stretch to eke out a win against the Utah Jazz team that, first of all, isn't very good, and second of all, was not playing their best players. A game that, Connor, I believe you used the word icky to describe. Connor, putting you on the hot seat. What made this Blazers-Jazz game so icky for you?
Yeah, I've been distinguishing wins this season as icky and not icky wins. It's just kind of it's naturally just it's what I feel. And some of those wins during the winning streak, not icky. Like, they were great. Like the enthusiasm, Scoot Henderson's performance, DeAndre Ayton was giving so much effort. Like, those are the wins that you feel good about, where they kind of point to the future a little bit more and maybe the cultural identity of defense that make you feel good. And then there have been some wins this season where it's the playoff rotation of like a strict like 8-man rotation of Jeremy Grant, Anthony Simons playing 40 minutes. Like, I don't mind that they're playing. Obviously, they're on the team. Like, that's fine. But when they're playing,
they're on the team. They're
on the team. Get them out there.
They are on the team. That's true.
Like, they're here. Yeah. Like, they're solid players.
Like
they're
get them paid. They have uniforms.
They have a job.
Have a locker. They have an ID card that lets them into the practice facility, ostensibly.
Yeah, but when they are the driving force of the minutes and the production, and they're doing that to beat a Jazz team that's tanking and they aren't playing their best players and they're barely eking out like a 2-point win. It's just like you leave that and it just doesn't like feel gratifying. And so like when the lottery odds get diminished and it's on the back of a great performance and especially with the young guys playing well, I feel good. But when the lottery odds get diminished and there's none of that kind of feel good camaraderie and kind of vision, it's what Ben was talking about a lot. It's like the vision and hope towards the future. And when that's not present, I'm not going to feel too great about a February win over the Jazz.
I think that is a completely fair take. I feel the same way. I don't know if we're going to get any clarity this year. That's what this is feeling like. Maybe I thought post All-Star, okay, maybe here comes the slight change in rotation and the minutes start changing and the mysterious injuries start popping up. And not that we're too far post All-Star break and there's still plenty of time, but it doesn't feel to me like Chauncey Billups is willing to give up this ghost. And I will speak from the eye. I'll speak for myself. I can understand Chauncey Billups, the person, the coach, he thinking that he's gotten a tough shake in his tenure at Portland. It's not going in totality the way that maybe he thought his first head coaching job would go, wanting to do what he can to preserve his professional reputation and get another job in a field that he loves, doing something that he enjoys, something that he thinks that he can be really good at. And I can understand that. And this is the moment where, as the general manager, you have to take away the toys. You can't allow Chauncey Billups to play with the real Lego sets. You got to give him the bric-a-brac. You got to give him the odd, misshapen, little flat pieces that no one, I'm being a little bit rude here in my Lego analogy, but you can't give him the full chest of toys to play with, because it's too important for the future of this team, not only because of the development of young players, but to your point, because of lottery odds. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, and like we're not going to shut down. I'm
okay. I'm okay. Ben,
we
not
like
using
the Blazers.
It is called "We Like the Blazers," and you don't have to be a part of that. That's fine. But I'm okay identifying as a fan. I know I'm a fan.
The Blazer, like, it's okay. I get to not shut down players and the ethics of tanking. Like, Ben said too, like with Washington, he's like, karma will come back to get them and they won't get Cooper Flagg, which like I like that thought. It tucks me in at night nicely.
Is this the Blazers cleansing their karma?
In a sense, and I think that's good. Like, do
you think
nice
they talk to Jeremy Grant and they're getting the sage smudge stick and just
maybe? But it's like. So the point is, I'm fine that they're not shutting everybody down, I guess, from a karmic standpoint. But still play Chris Murray and Ryan Rupert. Like, if you're not going to shut them down, don't play them 40 minutes every night.
Like karma doesn't necessitate you benching Shaedon Sharpe and playing him 19 minutes a game, right? Like, that's not what that means. Like, karma doesn't force you to play Jeremy Grant again 40 plus minutes when he can't hit a 2-point shot to save his life, and he's not playing great defense most of the time, and he can't grab a rebound most of the time. Like, karma's not telling you to do that.
Yeah, and the main thing I'm thinking right now is like, let Scoot cook, like free Scoot.
Let him cook,
because
let the man cook.
I really have been impressed with Scoot, and it's the more burden they've been putting on him lately, the better he's been. And like, you get these games where his impact is like, he's becoming way more efficient, but you'll still see he has he's like 3 of 7 on the night and like 6 assists in 25 minutes. And like, part of it's because he's off ball so much. And like, I'm starting to believe in his on ball creation. And I just think he should be running the show more, especially now that we get into February. And he's like, with Shaedon, sometimes I kind of agree with Ben's standpoint of like, Shaedon, he needs to kind of take it on himself a little bit more now to show that he's deserving of this more minutes. And I think Scoot has been doing that. And so like, give him the keys more then.
That's fine. And maybe we'll get out after this, but here's the nuance I want to put on that for me. If Shaedon Sharpe were competing only against the younger guys and he was not the best option to play the number of minutes that maybe I'd like to see him play, that's one thing. But that isn't what's happening. So if you were playing Rayon Rupert, if you're playing Chris Murray, if you were allowing Shaden Sharp to play more, if that were happening and he just didn't look as good, that's fine. But Connor, that's not what's happening. So that's all. Like, it's not like Shaden Sharp, he's not living up to expectations. He's not doing the things, everything we wanted to do and think that he could do and thought that he might be able to do when we started the season. Oh my gosh, I thought he was going to be a number 1 option. He doesn't even look like a number 3 option on a bad team. Put all of that aside, he's still, among the younger players, going to be one of your better options. And that's how you should be playing him. That's all.
I think that's very
chapstick drop. I can't drop my mic. It'd be too loud.
Brandon, when you make these points, Brandon, you make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. And if you want to make a lot of sense with us, how's that for an out?
Segue.
If you want to make a lot of sense with us, you can do that at WeLikeTheBlazers.com. You can also find us on Blue Sky. He's Connor Bergen. I'm Brandon Mullen-Goldner. Definitely check out Ben's work at the Washington Post. Definitely subscribe to the Greatest of All Talk podcast with Andrew Sharp and Ben Golliver. It's really good stuff. And you can also find our work at Blazers Edge. Of course, We Like the Blazers is a part of the Blazers Edge podcast family with Trail Daddy, hosted by Dave Deckard, and Rip City Roundtable, hosted by Cory Dickman. That are all the words I have, Connor. Me have no extra words. Words run out. So until next time, appreciate you all, and go Blazers.